I'm U.S. Senator John Cornyn of Texas, and this is The Elephant in the Room.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. I'm your host, Cyrus Pearson.
I'm your co-host, Carly Rapp.
Our guest today was U.S. Senator John Cornyn from the great state of Texas, and he talked about a wide variety of issues. Anything surprise you?
So many things. Yes, he loves to cook, and he shared with us his favorite type of food to cook.
Would not have guessed that. His choice of musical instrument that he took up really surprised me.
You know, another thing about that surprised me was the newest policy change on Southwest Airlines. You have to stick around to hear about it.
I mean, this is a point of discussion I'm sure you and your families are going to have. Let's start off, though, with a conversation about his wardrobe.
Let's go.
U.S. Senator John Cornyn from the great state of Texas. U.S. Senator John Cornyn of Texas, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you.
You are well-dressed, as always. I knew you would be.
Well, coming from you, that's quite a compliment.
Appreciate that. You've been well-dressed for years. Were you always stylish?
No. You know, I remember back when I was a kid, you know, of course, like every kid, you know, you wore what your mom bought for you. My mother had no taste in attire, so I was always embarrassed. So...
Well, what changed?
Well, I finally had an income where I could actually buy it myself. But, you know, the thing is, my big thing is about ties, right?
Okay.
Oh.
So women can change their appearance dramatically just with a different hairstyle, different, you know, hat, whatever,
Yes.
different dress or whatever. Men, it's very boring. And so what I figured out is the one way you can sort of maybe spice things up a little bit is get a snappy looking tie. So I've got more ties than I know what to do with.
Do you have a favorite tie?
Not really. I sort of rotate among them, just and it changes. My wife, you know, periodically comes into where my closet is and says, you know, can you get rid of some of these? Give them to Goodwill or whatever. Sell them on eBay, whatever.
Yeah.
Seriously, no. So that's the key to my haberdashery choices.
Ooh, haberdashery. Well, like your tie selection, everything is bigger in Texas. You represent just an unbelievably huge state. Second most population, around 30 million. I did math. I'm not great at it, but the bottom 23 states combined have about the population of your state. So it's about 46 senators trying to represent people like you do.
Yeah.
Do you think it's tougher to represent a big state like that? How do you stay in touch with your constituents and what they need?
Well, every time we start talking about how big Texas is, I think about Dan Sullivan and Lisa Murkowski, who said they could cut Alaska in half and still be bigger than Texas. But we've got a lot more people. So as you point out, about 30 million, and we've had a huge exodus of people from places like California and elsewhere coming to Texas. I think we add about 500,000 people a year to the population, which of course puts a lot of pressure on the infrastructure and things like that.
About 1 out of every 11 or 12 Americans are Texans.
Yeah. Well, and the rest want to be.
There's the Texan pride. I love this.
We have an expression in Texas. It may not have been born here, but I got here as fast as I could. Now, Texans are just proud about our state. We were an independent republic before we became a nation, and I think that sort of attitude still carries over from a long time ago. But you ask about how it is representing 30 million people. Some ways it's harder. Certainly more expensive, for example, when you run for election and have to advertise. You got a lot of media markets. And but in some ways it's almost easier because people don't necessarily expect you to show up everywhere all the time. So, but we do have a spreadsheet where we try to map out where we need to be, how many times a year. And so we spend a lot of time on Southwest Airlines. And when we can't get there that way, then charter to get around the state. But it's very diverse. I think people don't really understand either that the Rio Grande Valley is different from North Texas, the Panhandle, and West Texas is different from East Texas, and Central Texas, of course, which is where Austin is the most liberal part of the state. I always call Austin the blueberry and the tomato soup because otherwise Texas is pretty red, but it's pretty blue in Central Texas, right around the Austin area.
You mentioned Southwest Airlines. That was founded in Texas.
Absolutely.
And is that how you get around Texas mostly?
Pretty much. It's just really easy that way. But to the major cities, yes. But it gets a little more tricky when you start trying to make, fill your day up with multiple visits.
Yes, of
I
course.
still remember one time, actually this was before I was senator, when I was attorney general, when we were flying around, we tried to hit 5 media markets in one day.
Wow.
We ended up in El Paso because El Paso was actually Pacific time, so we figured we could add an extra hour to the day. But I was so brain numb after that day, I stood up in front of the TV cameras. I said, "Great to be back in San Antonio." And fortunately, the press uncharacteristically covered for me that day.
Well, Southwest Airlines had a major change coming up.
Let's talk about one of our many controversies coming up.
I know it's really they're really shaking things up here.
How do you
assigned
feel?
seats.
Well, yeah, for those who don't know, they are notorious for having an unassigned seat policy. They are assigning seats. What's been your experience, and what do you think about that?
Well, I have a secret sort of solution to that problem because I have so many points on Southwest Airlines. I was like 3 million points.
Wow.
I almost always am the very first person to enter the plane after the
Yes.
pre-boards. So I usually get to pick a seat that I like, and usually then my wife, who's on a companion pass, usually then I hold the seat for her and she comes down and so I don't think it's going to change our world that much, but maybe it'll make change the way they their business model so they can make more money for their shareholders.
I have a secret. I had a couple babies, and so I get to board early as well too. It seems like
Are they your babies?
I can't comment on that, Senator. I can't comment on that. Senator John wow, he's just, your name is synonymous with Texas. Senator John Cornyn from Texas is our guest today. We talked about the diversity of your state a little bit. Very diverse, right? This was interesting to me because I don't think about this type of food. Let's get into food. We heard you love to cook. One of your favorite cuisines to cook is Indian?
Yeah.
Is that true? How the heck did you get into Indian food?
Well, when I got to the Senate, one of my friends who I got to meet in the campaign trail was one of the founding members of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce in Dallas, Fort Worth. And so ultimately he said, well, you need to come to India, which Sandy and I did. And then one thing led to another. He said, well, we need a Senate India caucus. So the founding members of the Senate India caucus were me and, wait for it, Hillary Clinton. So today it's about 30 or so, maybe 30 plus members of the Senate who are members of the U.S. India caucus. Mark Warner is my current Democratic co-chair. But the relationship between the United States and India has gotten much closer over the years. But I love Indian food, but we have about 500,000 Indian Americans in Texas now. And particularly that was a fascinating, it manifested itself in a fascinating way because Prime Minister Modi came to Houston a few years ago, and it was just a raucous reception, 55,000 Indian Americans in one location. And it was called Howdy Modi. So it was a Texas flair.
Good combination.
And actually, President Trump knew it was going to be such an interesting show. He showed up as well.
Wow.
And he and Modi held each other's hands up in the air, and they paraded through the arena while people lost their minds. So, yeah, I've got a great Indian American constituency in Texas, and I think India and the United States have become closer geopolitically, and I hope that continues.
Now, when it comes to the food, do you have a spicy level you like?
You know, my wife doesn't like spicy. I like spicy.
Oh, really?
So
you like Indian spicy? Is what an Indian would
spicy.
say.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
You know, I used to say if it doesn't make your scalp sweat, it's not holiday. But I've had to back off of that more in recent times. But yeah, it's relatively easy to cook, and
Are you serious? Aren't there like 25 spices that go into each?
Well, it depends. You can do like Indian food for dummies, which is what I do.
I would do that.
Or you can do like Rosica here in Washington D.C. or one of my favorites in Texas. So those can get very, very exotic because they do have all these different spices. You got to go to a special store and buy all the different stuff, and it's just kind of mind-boggling. But I usually do the simple stuff.
Awesome.
Now, did you always cook, and do you cook more, or does your wife cook more?
She cooks regularly, but I kind of enjoy it from time to time. Usually involves some adult beverage of some kind while I'm doing maybe a glass of wine or something like that. So, when I have the time to do it, which unfortunately isn't often. But last night we had my my older daughter over for her birthday, and so I grilled some steaks, and it was all good.
Being from Texas, barbecue is huge.
Yes.
We hear there may have been a controversy over one of your brisket dishes.
Yeah, we take our barbecue seriously in Texas, but I know we're not alone.
Yes.
Different parts of the country have their difference in terms of the sauces and so forth. But brisket is really important in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Most Texas brisket is smoked for long period of time. I love it. I love all versions of brisket, but my wife, whose family originally came from Wisconsin, she inherited a recipe from her mother that involved something a little different. It involved a little more like tomato sauce and bake it in the oven. And I posted something on this a few years ago, and people lost their minds on the internet. Even Texas Monthly, which has a barbecue editor, was disparaging of my wife's and my mother-in-law's
Family recipe too.
Recipe for brisket. So I said, I believe in diversity, and I like the diversity when it comes to my brisket recipes too. I love all of them.
Well, if people don't believe it, the post on X now has over 5.5 million views of your brisket.
Isn't
with
that
over
unbelievable?
5,000 comments.
That's
It is
wild.
unbelievable.
Wild.
Now, do you post to X and Instagram yourself, or do you have people that do that for you?
Yeah, I do X primarily, and I got kind of interested in it just because it's a fast way to communicate with a lot of people. And I think I have roughly 370,000 followers. I don't know if all those are real people or not. But
you can claim them anyway.
But so yeah, I just try not to look at too many of the comments. But I usually try to post things that I think I find interesting personally, or things that my constituents in Texas might not otherwise see. A lot of times it involves national security issues, border issues, whatever is the current issues. And then sometimes things like brisket recipes, which causes the internet to explode.
To go crazy. Have you shared that brisket recipe, or is it
Oh
secret?
yeah. No, my wife is more than happy would be glad to share it with you too.
Oh,
So if people come
Let's
back
go,
and say we really enjoyed that brisket.
Yeah, I mean,
there you go.
It's really good.
It's a little different. A lot of people have people posting for them.
Yeah.
That's just something you decided against.
No, I mean, I do have.
I think it's more authentic for you to do that.
And I mean, I think people want to know a little bit more about their elected representatives, and sort of, it's a way to kind of become a little more human.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there is a risk involved, because if you hit the send button too quickly and you haven't really thought about it ahead of time, there can be a heavy price to be paid, which I think is why many elected officials don't do that. But I try to be a little more restrained and think twice before I hit the send button.
Let's jump to a bunch of different topics while we have time to do this. Your staff kind of informed us you might be getting a Grammy here. Grammys on the Hill.
I already did, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a shocker.
And Sheryl Crow got one at the same time as you, right?
She did.
Explain this to us.
Well, mine was not for music. Sheryl Crow's was. And Amy Klobuchar and I were the principal sponsors in the Senate of the Save Our Stages Act, which you'll recall during COVID, there was the Paycheck Protection Program and other programs designed to help small businesses stay afloat. But Amy and I focused on the venues that provide everything from music to plays to orchestras to museums and things like that. And as it turned out, we have a whole bunch of those folks in Texas, principally in Austin and in Dallas. And, you think about the performers. Well, there's a whole cast of people who support those performers, the lighting person, the sound person, and everybody who handles all the arrangements. Then when we all show up and get to enjoy the performance, this also includes some athletic performances and the like. So we set aside a chunk of money for these small businesses, and basically what we were told is that without that help during the depths of COVID, they wouldn't have survived. They were the first to shut down because people didn't view these as essential,
right?
And they were among the last to open up.
Wow!
So so they gave us a Grammy.
Whoa!
That's
congratulations!
amazing. Congrats on that. These are live music venues.
Yeah.
Do you recall your first concert?
Wow.
Or one of the most memorable concerts?
Y'all are too young to remember these guys. Let me see. What's his name now? There's a group they used to call Traffic, but this was back in the 70s, I think.
Okay.
Maybe Stevie Winwood.
Okay.
Was the keyboard player and singer. He went on to do his own thing. I think I went to a concert with my sister because she was 5 years older than I was. I, of course, got in with her, and that's my first concert. But so I've always enjoyed music. Played some when I was younger.
You did?
Yeah, I was a trombone player.
Really?
For many years, and up until college. Then I realized that girls didn't really like trombone players. They did like if you played the guitar. So I tried to learn guitar, but I learned it badly. It didn't work out that great.
Let me talk about somebody that you like. I heard Robert Earl Keane.
Yeah.
Now, I'm embarrassed. I didn't really know much about him, but I listened to some of his songs. Amazing voice, and I think it's like a fine wine. It's kind of even gotten better with age.
Yeah, it's not, there's better singers, but I think his strength is as a storyteller. And the stories he tells through his songs are just kind of amazing. He actually started out with Lyle Lovett when both of them were at Texas A&M, and you can hear him. They've talked about this over the years. But both of these guys are identified as regional, sort of music heroes in Texas. I don't know how big their appeal is outside of the state, but I know Robert Earl comes up here from time to time and plays in this area along with some of the other Texas performers.
Yeah, he'll actually, we do have, surprisingly, some people in D.C. listen to us.
Yeah.
He will be here in town August 6th through 8th.
Oh, good.
And he'll be in Richmond August 9th, so I may actually try to go see that.
I think you'd really enjoy it. He's and the musicians are superb. So, but Robert Earl writes all the songs. Interestingly, he was one of the reasons too that I got involved in some of the ticketing reforms.
Okay,
that became most obvious when Taylor Swift complained about the fact that some of these bots would buy big blocks of tickets and then try to scam people in the secondary market.
Right.
Yeah.
Robert Earl told me, he said, "Look, I charge." My fans X amount of dollars on the ticket, but then it gets scalped essentially by these secondary markets, and then they think I'm the one to blame. So my reputation as a performer, my relationship with my fans is damaged by these bots. So anyway, that's something we continue to work on. I know Senator Marsha Blackburn has been really active in that area, again, with Amy Klobuchar. So something that we're working on. But it sort of came to me through some of my constituents and some of my favorite performers.
What struck me about it, I started listening to the music, and I guess his genre is kind of described as alternative country, maybe traditional, but it was kind of like a folk outlaw country to me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, he's got a song about, you know, the road goes on forever.
And the party never ends.
Yeah, there you go. You got to add that in. I mean, there's like robbery, there's pot, there's like, you know.
And people getting killed.
Right,
Yeah.
and so I'm listening to that, and I'm thinking, John Cornyn is listening to this. He is not a stuffy, out-of-touch guy. I'm thinking of how many cool points you get for listening to that.
Well, I
kind of
live
music.
vicariously through his music. I don't actually do that in my real life, but yeah, I mean that's part of the stories that he tells that are just very vivid, and I think he's got a huge appeal, as did Lyle Lovett, to the college crowd. You know, the music is very popular. Usually involves a fair amount of beer and I think libations of different sorts. But
Yes.
yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
I'm really looking forward to that. Let's talk about something you touched upon, the U.S. migration to Texas. Elon Musk even moving headquarters to Texas. Is this something you welcome? Is this something
absolutely. You know, we worried a little bit back when I was on the ballot last time in 2020 whether, you know, who was moving to Texas. Is it people who were refugees from socialism, or were the people who wanted to bring some of these bad policies to a red state? And by and large, we found out as people fleeing, you know, the economic situation, overregulation if you were a business, high taxes, but also people worried about the schools and worried about public safety. And so we've had a huge migration. And I think people like Elon, of course, are famous, but he's an incredible entrepreneur, obviously done things that nobody else has done before. And just as such an interesting personality. I was visiting with him out at his gigafactory for Tesla, which he employs 10,000 people in the Austin area, and he's amazing. Produces the vast majority of electric vehicles in the country, and did so without the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies even before that. Yes. But he's also headed up SpaceX, which now takes the majority of American payloads into space, including national security payloads. And then he's got this thing called Neuralink, where he's trying to put the implants in people's brains. I'm hoping that will, you know, someday make me a lot smarter.
Can you afford to get smarter?
And then he's got this boring company, which actually bores tunnels. And
I mean, really exciting.
He's just he's a Renaissance man. But yeah, we've attracted all sorts of interesting entrepreneurs there. We I still feel like Texas is one of those places where people can come with a good idea or willing to work hard and pursue their dreams and be successful beyond their imagination.
You are the Texas senator, so we'd be remiss talking about U.S. migration, illegal immigration.
Yeah.
You touched upon it earlier.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Could we get your viewpoint as the Texas senator?
Yeah, it's changed over time. I mean, it's always existed to some extent, but usually it was just a trickle of poor people from Mexico wanting to come work and wanting a better life, and we all understand that. But it was relatively small numbers, and it was more or less controlled because you had policies in place that discouraged people from coming around the world. And literally right now, what we have is people coming from around the world because they realize if they show up at the border that the Biden-Harris administration will let them in, and they'll be able to stay. So why go through the legal immigration hoops when you can get there that way? It also, unfortunately, though, it's making cartels, criminal organizations, rich because they charge by the head. And these are the same people that also smuggle the drugs across the border that killed 108,000 Americans last year. So the Harris-Biden administration is just, I guess I now have called it the Harris-Biden administration, has just been an unmitigated disaster for my state. And a lot of places where, even along the border communities where you might think they would be pretty sympathetic to the migrants, have just been so overwhelmed. They've actually said, you know, they want to return to the Trump policies, which at least created some controls and some throttling of the flow of people. And then, of course, you've seen what's happened in places like New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., where these self-styled sanctuary cities that are now being overwhelmed, and they're saying, can you stop this? And, unfortunately, the Biden administration won't do it.
Yeah, when we talked about, how many people are in Texas, about 1 out of every 11 or 12 Americans is a Texan. About 1 in 34 people, if you break down the numbers, is here illegally who came over approximately the last 3.5 years, creating problems nationwide. I mean, even for undeniable problems like representation in the Electoral College,
right?
Even if you aren't allowed to vote.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a real problem. And you recall Senator Haggerty had an amendment in a recent bill that was all Democrats voted against. I mean, we're drawing congressional districts based on population, which include a chunk of people who are not here legally and non-citizens, and also for purposes of the Electoral College.
So all Democrats are voting against that. Are you going to need to have Republican control sometime between now and the next census in order to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, we're going to, of course, do everything we can legislatively, and of course, depending on how the election turns out on November the 5th, if we win the trifecta, we'll be in a much stronger position to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem, and it's also, now I saw Elizabeth Warren interviewed over the weekend, basically saying Kamala Harris would make sure that all the people who've come here illegally would get a pathway to citizenship, and I presume ultimately register to vote, and I guess they hope they'll vote for Democrats.
Yeah, let's seg that into this. And then we also heard, recent news, not to date this podcast, that, they should make changes to the Supreme Court from Biden. Well, I'll let you address that, and then I'll go on to the question.
These folks are truly radical. And really the focus is on getting and keeping power. And when things don't go their way because the voters don't agree with them, then they are looking for ways to circumvent the voters in order to get or retain that power. And so they don't like the direction of the Supreme Court, which actually I think the recent additions to the Supreme Court during the Trump administration and when we were in the majority is some of the most enduring legacies of the first Trump administration, and some of the things they've been doing to basically give accountability back to the voters and put the responsibility on Congress to actually pass the laws and to approve of the policies rather than have these unelected bureaucrats do what they want based on whatever the current administration wants. I think that's absolutely critical. So they are trying to, number one, change the subject. They don't want to talk about inflation. They don't want to talk about the border. And number two, I think this is what they hope to do is basically upend the constitutional separation of powers and take control over the courts.
Well, let me ask this question. We asked Senator Steve Daines from Montana this question. What do you think this country looks like after this election under a Republican Senate versus a Democrat-run Senate? So paint a picture for our listeners what they could expect under those scenarios.
Well, I think it may surprise people, but I think in many ways it will be a return to normalcy. I think one of the things that people, my constituents, people I talk to, comment to me is their attitude is kind of like, what comes next? What other curveball are we going to see? What other institutional norm are we going to see upended? And it just seems like they just keep coming at us. And I think there's now that this election will be is in some ways backlash associated with people's sense that things have gotten out of whack. Things as basic as our institutions like the FBI, the Department of Justice, the court system, which has now been weaponized by our Democratic friends, as another way to basically destroy political opponents and to get and retain the power that they thrive on. So I think a return to normalcy in a way, maybe not in terms of the rhetoric, but in terms of the actual developments. I think having a Republican majority in the Senate is absolutely key because, as Senator McConnell says, we are in the personnel business. We have to confirm these judges and these agency heads, and I think we can have additional leverage no matter who gets elected president. But if President Trump gets elected president, I think we will be able to, I guess, restore a lot of some of those basic norms in terms of how governance occurs in the country. And we can do things like maintain the current tax code, which if we don't reauthorize it next year would result in a $3 trillion tax increase. Wow. 62% of Americans would experience an increase in taxes. But then do some things like we've talked about already, like to make sure that our political system is run by citizens, and that we stop this huge influx of humanity, and we restore legal immigration. I happen to believe legal immigration has been one of the secrets to our success as a country. We still naturalize about 1 million people a year, and they come from everywhere, but they come the right way. They don't jump ahead of everybody in line, and you don't get the criminals or potential terrorist element or the illegal drugs that we see now with uncontrolled borders. Yeah. So I think I'm anxious to see what the next 100 days produces, and there couldn't be more at stake.
With some of that normalcy, do you think a lot of that is relinquishing those rights back to the state rather than the federal government?
Yeah, this is a debate we've had since the inception of our country, whether we were a national government and all the laws and everything would be dictated out of Washington, or whether we would have 50 sovereign states who maintain the authority within their own borders to run their states, subject only to those areas like national security and others where federal authority was important.
Yes.
But Democrats seem to be the party of big government and a national government, and Republicans have tended to be more believe in the original intention of the framers that we are a federal government, and that in the words of the 10th Amendment, those powers not delegated to the federal government are retained by the people and the states. And that provides for some diversity, not a one size fits all, because, for example, Maine or Vermont may have different priorities than people in Texas and Arizona or Florida.
Very true.
And that's something that preserves that authority in a federal system that would be missing in a national system where all states would be required to accept basically a national rule or national law.
Yeah.
Final question, because we're on borrowed time here, just to let your staff know. You've been here long enough to see a well-run Senate, maybe a not-so-well-run Senate.
Maybe.
What do you think is the difference, and how's it going now?
Well, the problem, I mean, it seems so almost trite, but we talk about regular order. That means running the Senate by the rules and by the norms of the Senate. And, it's been a critical part of our country's success for all these many years since we became an independent nation. And unfortunately, that rules-based functioning of the Senate has been eroded by things like omnibus appropriation bills, destroying our ability to basically pay the bills in an orderly and transparent fashion, and then just I think restoring the power of the committees on a bipartisan basis to mark up and pass legislation. I remember the last time we were in the majority, Senator McConnell said to the chairman of the committees, "Bring me your legislation and show me 60 votes. We'll put it on the floor." And we'll actually let senators participate in the process, offer amendments, debate them, and vote on them. I think that would dissipate a lot of the frustration and anger people are feeling, because right now they feel like, in the words of Brendan Sullivan, you may not remember this, but he was defending Ollie North before a congressional hearing. He said, "What do you think I am, a potted plant?" Members of Congress are feeling a lot like potted plants because it's not easy to get here and it's not easy to stay here. But I know while people are here, they actually want to do their job and to represent their constituency. And they can't do that under the current management.
Yeah.
Well, Senator, the road may go on forever, but unfortunately, this podcast party does have to end due to time restrictions.
I'm so disappointed.
Us more than you.
Well, thank you
Senator
for having
John
me.
Cornyn. Yeah, thank you for being here
joining
today.
us.
I enjoyed it.
Carly, I know this close is all me, but that was most of the podcast, unfortunately. Now, you said you're actually going to try to cook that brisket?
I am.
Well,
I would love to. If not, when I go home, I would love my dad to try to cook it.
And your roommate, if not.
Yes.
So between the three of you, somebody is going to make that.
As long as I get the recipe from the senator or his wife, then yes.
All right, I can't wait to hear how that turned out.
Okay.
If you enjoyed The Elephant in the Room, if you enjoyed it, if I didn't enunciate that enough, please like and subscribe or follow, and that way it will pop up on your app when we have a new episode out. Many senators to come. Let's give some credits here. This is done under the direction of U.S. Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming. Our executive producer is Arjun Modi. Our show producer is also our co-host today, Carly Rapp. Thank you so much, Carly.
Thank you.
Our technical director is Rashad Smith. Thanks for listening once again. Until next time, this has been The Elephant in the Room.